Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about DLC, which is a massively controversial topic, and I just want to get your opinions on this, so feel free to comment and so on, if you agree, disagree, or what have you on my opinions. So, this video was sparked primarily by Mass Effect 3 and Street Fighter X Tekken, which of course is released by EA and Capcom respectively. So, the whole controversy started, I'll start with Street Fighter X Tekken, that the roster, or shall I say the disc, has another further 12 characters on it. Now, during the development, people were very excited about certain characters being included in the roster, and as it turns out they were, but you had to actually pay to unlock those characters. Now, people are a bit annoyed about this, because some characters, for example, on the Vita and so on, were unlocked and blah blah blah. But it became more confusing because then there were reports by basically hackers slash crackers that were saying that there was a huge amount of the content actually on the disc, and you know, they found out there were movies on the disc, for example. Anyway, they continued, and you know, a couple of days later, they found that actually the entire characters were playable on the disc. And there were actually live streams being done and so on with these 12 characters, 6 on each side, so 6 on Tekken, 6 on Capcom. And so obviously Capcom weren't too happy about this, and neither were the fans. Capcom, of course, not happy because, you know, people found out that it was on the disc, and you know, the fans not very happy because a lot of people felt that they were being gypped. They basically felt that they were paying for content effectively twice. In other words, you'd pay your X amount of cash, let's say pounds, so you pay your £35 or £40, what have you, for the game, and then they felt that they had to pay that, basically that £40 would include the DLC. Basically, you were buying everything on a disc. But then to play some of that stuff on the disc, you'd have to effectively pay more money. Others argued that no, that's just not the case. They're just giving you an easy way to play the content that you then buy. And there were analogies that, you know, just because you you know, you buy the game doesn't mean that you have access to all the content for all time. You know, they're just saying, well, this is just a separate product. It's kind of like if you buy a car, for example, that doesn't mean that your car gets all optional extras. You know, it may have the facility to hold those extras, but it doesn't mean that, you know, your car comes with power-assisted steering and air conditioning, you know, and every other thing under the sun. It just means that you get the basic model. Now, that didn't really sit well with many people, and some people are organising boycotts of the game. Some people are saying that it's not, you know, it's not cool, and they'll just, you know, not buy the DLC. I'm going to somewhat jump off topic for a second and talk about how I think DLC has been implemented well by, say, let's go with EA. Back in the days of Mass Effect 2, when it was, you know, first released, there were a few, you know, cool things here and there that were released for DLC, or shall I say pre-order bonuses and so on, such as armor, which I won't get into, at least for now. And a little bit later on, or shall I say somewhat later on, there were a few pieces of DLC such as Lair of the Shadow Broker and Kasumi's Stolen Memory that were being released. Now, talking about Lair of the Shadow Broker, for example, it was a very substantial piece of content. You actually felt like you were enjoying something. You actually felt like it wasn't a waste of your cash. It was several hours long, probably about 3 or 4 hours. I don't actually remember exactly, but it was fairly decent, especially if you explored everything and so on. And you know, it contributed somewhat well to the storyline. However, the controversy was of Mass Effect 3 was, I don't know if you guys have played Mass Effect series, but I'm assuming for a second you haven't, just to explain it so this doesn't seem somewhat confusing to you. But there are a group in the game, or should I say a race in the game, called the Protheans, which are extremely integral to the whole storyline. Now, in the Mass Effect storyline, they've been pretty much all wiped out, but in Mass Effect 3, you get the opportunity, assuming you buy the DLC, to actually recruit one Prothean on your team, which obviously will somewhat, you know, impact the story, and you'll get, you know, new ideas of, you know, what's actually going on in the world, and so on. Now, I'm not exactly far through Mass Effect 3 at the moment. I'm somewhat chipping away at it, but I haven't had much time due to work and other constraints. But I am, slowly going through it. So I can't say just how much having the Prothean actually has or has not affected the storyline, because I've literally just got him on my playthrough. So, with all of that said, people are saying that, it's a Prothean. How can you not include this character? It's such a main character. It's like, the whole game is pretty much built around this race, or, one of the main premises of the game is built around this one race, and you don't include him as, like, one of the main characters. That's just not, that's just not fair, pretty much, is what it comes down to. Once again, the other flip side of the coin is, hey, you don't know, you'll still get the storyline. It's just, this is like optional bits behind the scenes, kind of, well, maybe not behind the scenes, but it's almost just optional, and you just learn a little bit more about the storyline, if that's your thing, but otherwise you'll still get the full, complete story. And there are some arguments, for example, some people have said, well, how do you know the entire game wasn't written around the fact that the Prothean wasn't actually available, and then someone, 6 months after the storyline for the game was penciled in and completed, said, hey, you know what would be a great, fantastic idea? If we actually added a Prothean in, so we could see things more from his side of the story, and therefore more additional content was made. So it's almost like, say, let's go with a comic between a film. Let's say, for example, a film's made and then they may make a comic of it, which is kind of telling you what's actually happening between the films. If you watch, film A and film B of the series, you still get the full, story of the films, but, the comic just kind of pencils it in. That's one analogy that some person gave, which is somewhat fair. It's a good analogy, but obviously we don't know either way. We don't know. I'd like to think EA would not have just decided, you know what, this is a very good character. I'm pretty sure people will pay extra for this, so let's make it a DLC, because people definitely pay for the extra. I don't think they would do that. Maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. I'm kind of hoping it is. So I know I haven't really answered any opinions on this. I'm very much on the fence with it, to be honest with you. The Capcom thing with the Street Fighter X Tekken did somewhat annoy me. I can't really tell you why, since, to be honest, I'm not even particularly interested in the game anyway. I'm a fairly large fighting game fan. I play a lot of Street Fighter, Tekken and so on. Back in the day of Tekken, I actually used to play a lot, fairly competitively as well, but haven't played in a number of years now. But I also play other fighting games as well, and really, I started my fighting game career as it were, when I was really young, on games such as Mortal Kombat and Virtua Fighter 1, which were fantastic, by the way. But for some reason, this one game, Street Fighter X Tekken, just hasn't really grabbed me and made me think I really want to play this particular game. So, in that respect, it doesn't really affect me directly, but, the direction, of course, that the companies go after this, if they use, what happens with Street Fighter X Tekken as a gauge, what they feel is acceptable, that will, of course, impact us all. Now, I'm not saying Capcom were wrong for doing something, I would have felt, I think everyone would have felt better if the characters were not on the disc, and, say, 4 months down the line they released a glut of the characters. I don't think Capcom would have got any complaints. The reason that they said that they did include the characters on the disc, however, and it's a fairly valid point, and that is, let's say, for example, you want to play against someone, say online, and that means you don't have to download that character to fight against them. It's done. It's right there. Or, for example, if you're taking your disc around a friend's house, or say, for example, you're taking your drive around a friend's house, it means you don't have to worry about downloading extra content and so on. It's just literally a case of just popping it in, and you've got all the stuff. As long as your account is good and golden, then you've got permission to access it, and it's a fairly decent point. So, with all of that said, I don't think I'm adding particularly anything into this. I'm just very I'm just very curious about how people are finding the ideas of it. I'm very curious about, what people actually feel is acceptable. Do you feel that it should be run concurrently with game development, or do you think it should then happen later? Or do you feel that, it matters one bit or the other as long as you get a great game? For me, I'm personally of the mind that as long as the game's fantastic, it doesn't particularly bother me too badly. The game, for example, Mass Effect 3, let's say I had not have purchased the extra DLC for the Prothean, and I'm sure there'll be other pieces of DLC as well that's going to be released. But let's assume for just a moment I had not purchased that and I just completed the game. I have no doubt that I would have loved the game regardless. Mass Effect 3 is a fantastic production, and you can definitely tell every minute of the dialogue, the cutscenes, the music, the direction are fantastic. The only slight criticism I have of the game is actually regarding the graphics, and this is ranging on niggling rather than actual complaint. It's actually ranging on being slightly petty, but I don't particularly find the foliage in a lot of the areas very pretty. I think it's very stiff and ugly looking, which is somewhat unusual because the Unreal Engine usually does a pretty good job, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But that's a very minor niggling point. So anyway, as I said, I'm just very curious about what people think is not acceptable. So feel free to leave some responses. I don't feel that I've probably covered much new ground here, but I'm just kind of wanted to get a sense of where people's opinions lie on it. So with with all of that said, I hope you guys will be able to enjoy the video at least somewhat, and take care and goodbye.